Hi everybody, and welcome to Scottish Autism Facebook Live, and I'm so pleased that we're joined today by Emily Lovegrove, author of Autism, Bullying and Me. Welcome, Emily, to Scottish Autism.
Thank you.
It's absolutely lovely to have you on. So let's just start by, you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself and why bullying is of interest to you.
Okay. I used to be a piano teacher for many years, and then my kids left home and I thought I need something to do. So I went off to university and studied psychology, and at the end of it was offered a funded PhD to look at how appearance affects teenagers. And the main thing that I found was that they feared being teased or bullied about the way that they look. So I'd kind of finished the PhD, but that felt mean to get hundreds and hundreds of kids to divulge their inner feelings about being bullied and then just go, oh, thanks for that, bye. So I then went into anti-bullying strategies that were available, specifically those for kids who have major facial disfigurements, and worked with teenagers on devising a set of strategies that would help them cope, and also I spent a lot of time looking at why aggression happens, what it's about. And anyway, in the end, we came up with a set of strategies. We experimented. I mean, these teenagers were beyond wonderful. Came up with lesson plans to help. Went into schools and did a study, looked at how they felt beforehand, at 6 months afterwards, at 6 weeks afterwards, and then at 6 months afterwards. And what we found was that when kids have got a range of anti-bullying strategies that are self-empowering, they not only find it easier to kind of ignore the stupid stuff, but they're also much more confident about calling in an adult when it's serious and going, no, you need to listen, this is serious. So their confidence was higher at 6 weeks, but it really rocketed by 6 months. So that was fabulous. And I went on then to work with American universities and hospitals, bringing the information that I'd gained back again to a disfigured population. Then I was really ill and we moved house, and I got offered a job as anti-bullying consultant in Wales. And increasingly, I found parents were coming to me saying, my child cannot cope with school. We have got an appointment with CAMS, but it's in 18 months, 2 years. Yeah. So can you work with them? And as it evolved, it was often kids who are autistic who were finding those major stresses and anxieties about going to school and feeling different. And I identified with this because I've always felt different. And it was quite a long time afterwards that actually there was autism diagnosed in my family, in both children and grandchildren. And it was suggested that I might try for a diagnosis as well. And when I did, she just went, how have you gone under the radar this long? So then I've worked a lot more with autistic kids and realized that bullying for them and their families is a major issue. So hence the book.
and that certainly, that resonates so much with us here at Scottish Autism, because we engage with lots of families of children who would have experienced, and adults who've experienced
Yeah,
bullying. And I think sometimes it's frustrating for people to be believed that what they're feeling and experiencing is bullying. So do you think there's an issue with how we define and understand bullying? How would you explain that?
definitely. I mean, certainly here, all schools are legally obliged to have an official definition. What is bullying? It usually says something along the lines of it has to be deliberate. I think often kids are not deliberately nasty. They just say the wrong thing, but it can be incredibly upsetting. Has to be repeated. It really doesn't. If you know that thing about the evil eye, my mother had an evil eye. Trust me, it just needed the once. Doesn't need to be repeated. And an imbalance of power, that often isn't the case either. I've worked with children who are large for their age, you know, really tall boys who've been picked on by 5 smaller boys and been told, you can't fight back because you're bigger than they are. So that doesn't work either. And we give kids strategies that are logical, but actually bullying isn't logical, it's emotional. So and physical, it has a biological stress response, and that's what we need to look at.
That is so insightful and so important, because the physical aspect is obviously, I suppose, the more obvious part of it. It's what people see and connect with, but the emotional impact and how that resonates with people. What would be some of those strategies, Emily?
Okay, one of the things that we're often told is just ignore it, it'll stop. It's a logical response, it often works, but under stress, what happens is, you know, our brains use up this the thinking part of our brain uses up the most enormous amount of oxygen and energy. And under stress, what happens is all that energy is diverted away from the thinking part of your brain that goes, I probably shouldn't bother with this, into the part of your brain that deals with survival. So, for instance, your heart pounds, oxygen goes to your arms and legs so that you can either fight back or you can run away, or, as often happens with lots of autistic people I've spoken to, it goes into locking the muscles and freezing. So breathing becomes very shallow. You just don't think, you just stop. So one of the things that we have to do is teach kids a way of getting oxygen back up into the thinking part of their brain. And it's perfectly doable. And I do a breathing and grounding exercise with people. I was working with a girl yesterday who is terrified of performing on stage. She, good musician, made a couple of mistakes, now is really anxious. So what you have to do is to take a deep breath, and as you breathe out, you breathe that air, it sounds odd, but as if it was going downwards through your legs, through your feet, and under the ground, and growing the most enormous roots. And you breathe out until you've got no air left. And at the end of that, your body takes over. You take a huge breath in, and bingo, your thinking brain has enough oxygen again to think. It takes practice with, if if you're a parent with younger children, I would encourage breathing in a colour that makes you feel brave. There are a range of colours. I would imagine something like red, but I've had people saying I would breathe in purple and pink, and that would go under the ground. And, I always explain that it's like a tree in a high wind. If you've got very shallow roots or you're shaky, you're easy to knock over. Once you're really properly grounded, the energy comes back. You can think, you can concentrate. So that would be probably the first thing I would ever teach anybody. We all think we know how to breathe, but we're not necessarily aware of the differences under stress, and feeling bullied is feeling stressed.
That's so interesting, and the biological aspects of stress are increasingly well understood, and so I suppose it's about equipping people ahead of those experiences, giving people those good proactive strategies. I have to say there's a lot of people commenting about how common this is, about their children. Jane saying her son was bullied in high school, Annie saying that she was constantly bullied, and teachers blamed her for having no friends and not fitting in, but she wasn't diagnosed until she was 28. Can we speak a bit about that, blaming the person who's feeling the bullying? Is that common?
Very much so, because although you've got, we were talking about rigid definitions of bullying. Actually, if you feel bullied, you have exactly the same physiological, biological responses, the same emotional responses, and also behavioral responses. When we feel threatened by somebody, people say, oh, go out, see your friends, phone somebody. But actually, that's the last thing you want to do when you feel that you're being bullied. You withdraw. So I do understand that, and I do understand that to be autistic is to find making friendships often quite difficult, because I think there are far more of us who are autistic than we know about, particularly women. But it's finding that smaller part of the population, and making links with them. Which is why Twitter is so wonderful. But I absolutely understand this thing about being told you're not, you should make friends. Yeah. It's a logical thing to say. It's harder to do.
Absolutely, it's very, very hard to do. You mentioned about the breathing exercises as a way of grounding and getting the oxygen back to the brain. What are some of the other strategies that people might think about in terms of that, taking care of that biological stress response?
Right. One thing is that we tend to have very negative views of ourselves. And I think particularly if you have always felt, as I used to pre-diagnosis, kind of mad, bad and sad, and often referred to as, oh, Emily, she's crazy. So I think in our heads, this forms our view of ourselves. And the trouble is, other people judge us on the way it's hard to describe. The way we feel about ourselves influences how other people see us. So for instance, if I felt today, oh God, I've no idea about this stuff. I should have worked harder. I don't understand it. They probably won't like me. And I wish I'd worn a different necklace. I hate this one. You can see my body language is not good, you and your listeners are going to be anxious, thinking, oh, we thought she was good when we invited her on.
And she is.
But if I can change that, what I would call a self motto, into something like, I do know my stuff. I've worked extremely hard over the years to know my stuff academically and intellect, and emotionally inside out. I'm approachable. I may be autistic, but I do like people. And actually, I already had a compliment on my necklace from your lovely host. So that makes me feel much more confident. And it makes you think, she's friendly, she knows her stuff, it's okay. So you relax. So
and there's a lot of lessons there, aren't there, for how we should interact with children, autistic children and autistic adults, around that kind of idea of deficit versus, capacity and difference. If we're always emphasising things that people find difficult, that plays into a kind of inner narrative where we emphasise the positives and the skills. So there's something there about how we teach individuals and how we perceive autism and how we, put that more positive message out, is there not?
There is. And I think if we were only able to celebrate it as a difference, we find any kind of diversity a threat. Again, it's back to your biology. If we were in the Stone Age and somebody appeared that looked different from us, that is a threat. It's a potential threat. So people are influenced by that biology to become very anxious around difference. What we don't do enough of is encouraging knowledge about difference. So we might meet one person who is autistic, who is offhand, and go, oh, you know what, they're really off, they don't have any eye contact, they're not friendly. And we judge it on one or two examples. And personally, I think encouraging diversity, getting kids to understand the huge range there is in people, both, it's not just about your neurotype, it's about your colour, it's your background, it's your way of coping with the world. We form quite rigid tribes and we go, we're okay, but you're different, so you cannot be okay. So that would be, to me, such an important thing to do in schools. And I know it's hard. I know teachers are told, these are the things you will teach and you will be tested, your children will be tested on.
We've got Lorna, who is endorsing your breathing, saying that it's a really positive activity. It works very successfully, and she uses it with autistic young people in school. Presumably, she works in school. So we've mentioned breathing. We've mentioned the positive affirmations, the self mottos. Is there another strategy you could share with us that would be helpful for folks?
Well, I think it's always good to find, I've just said don't divide into tribes, but actually finding your autistic tribe is a very lovely thing. I joined Twitter, for instance, I think just before my diagnosis, and through Twitter, I've, it sounds a bit school-like, but I met my best friend, and that to me was transformative. Here was somebody who absolutely accepted me for who I am, who I can say anything to, and who is always supportive. And, you know, I only hope I do the same for her. It's Damien Milton's stuff on, people may say, we don't communicate. We communicate beautifully between ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's them who find it difficult to communicate with us. I have 2 autistic grandsons. I don't have any problem communicating with them. We talk on a really deep level about things. But at the same time, we can be very quiet. We can sit in a room and I'm on my phone and they're on their laptop. I don't have a problem with that. But I have a neurotypical old friend who would have a huge problem with that and would say, "Not on your phone again, are you?" You know, like,
That sounds like me, to be honest. I'm one of those naggers.
the thing is, it's my way of dipping out.
Yeah.
It's my way of self-soothing. So I understand that. And there are so many things that we can't do to self-soothe that are obvious. I mean, my ultimate self-soothing is that I've always sucked my thumb. I know that's a terrible admission to make. It's not acceptable when you're on the bus or when you're on the stage waiting to be called up. So I have other ways of self-soothing, which I've, you know, a lot of them I don't suppose I recognize that I do. But I have huge sympathy for those kids who come back from school absolutely exhausted from trying to fit in, trying to keep the mask there. And what they want to do is just stop. It's kind of the adult equivalent of a G&T, I think.
Just exhausting, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
How exhausting it is. And I've often used that analogy myself, that some of these sort of soothing or comforting things that people do are like, you know, me getting in a Friday and pouring a glass of wine, or maybe not always a Friday, maybe a Thursday now because we're in lockdown. And I think that that's it's all about perception, isn't it? And it's a two-sided thing. It's about how hard we work to enable autistic individuals to self-accept, but also we have to do that work with wider society to accept difference and diversity and not see it as that sort of primordial threat that you mentioned, that it's actually just part of the human spectrum and the human condition. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. There's so many people who are messaging with examples of bullying, which is obviously worrying. And what I want to say is that Emily's very kindly offered to respond to comments on the Facebook page once we've finished. If people have specific questions, I'll try and answer just now. Ask them just now. There was a question further back about adults, Emily. Yeah. So obviously, when these things can happen in childhood, but bullying happens on into adulthood. If you get any specific advice for autistic adults who may feel they're being bullied, maybe in employment settings or in relationships, those types of things?
Yeah. One of the things that I ask them, will bullying stop when you leave school? And about 95% will confidently say, yeah. So teaching them self-empowering strategies to cope in childhood is a life skill. It's not something we can duck out of. It's vital. Because if we don't, yes, you do go on to get bullied in the workplace because you have learned all those patterns of feeling inadequate. And so you are much more of a target to people. People raise their self-esteem in two ways. One is to do really fantastic things and think, wow, I've done this, I feel good about myself. The other equally successful way of raising your self-esteem is to put other people down so that in comparison, you look better. And we really mustn't think of bullies as thugs. Often they are incredibly clever and skilled at social skills that make other people feel like idiots, which is what bullying is. Essentially, it's a tool to humiliate people. And feeling humiliated as an adult in your work life is equally horrible. And I would also put in that when I have worked with groups of elderly people, being bullied as a child affected their life decisions all the way through, from further, did they go on to further education, who they married, their work choices, the way they treated their own children. So it is a lifelong thing. And the other important thing to say is that watching other people get bullied has been found to be just as damaging as being bullied yourself. So it's never too late to learn. And I have to say, I know it's a book plug, but one of the loveliest things have been the number of adults who have written to me and said, I'm 30, I'm 50, I really loved the book and I'm using the strategies. So however old you are, never think, well, I've left it too late, or things can't change, or, you know, I'm in an abusive relationship, I don't know how to get out of it. You can, honestly, but it's learning those strategies, learning what works for you, learning to be nice to yourself. We often aren't. And one lovely idea that somebody wrote to me recently was, in better moments, having a jar and putting in a slip of paper of things that you think, oh, this is something I enjoy, so that in the really grim times, you can pick it out and go, have a, you know, this particular ice cream or whatever, or, oh, it says, have a bubble bath. Just easy things to do, not huge things.
It's a lovely idea, but also what I'm feeling after hearing you is just how pervasive and how enduring the effects of bullying are. A really interesting question has come up from Hazel. And I guess this goes back to what we were thinking about at the start, about how you perceive bullying. And she's saying, how can you help an autistic child recognise that they are being bullied in the first place? She's seen that they often don't recognise it and go along with things and then maybe snap, and then the blame is put on them.
Yes.
The action, you know, that sort of someone else is, in this scenario, is perceiving the child as being bullied, but the child themselves is not seeing it. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think it is difficult. I think from personal experience, I never recognise it until too late, and then feel hurt. And I think that's true for a lot of people. How do we, I think talking about bullying, understanding how bullying works is useful. For instance, one of the things that I do in school is ask a class of kids, who here reckons they're a bit of a bully sometimes? Rarely will you get any child to admit to this? So I will get up a couple of kids randomly, stand them beside me, say, you're being bullied. You think this isn't okay. So, you know, who thinks it isn't okay to bully? Oh, none of us. I then say to the child who's being bullied, I don't know why you wear those shoes. You look really stupid. And then I turn to the child who is supposedly the bully and say, do you think this is okay? And they go, well, they are stupid. They play along. Ask another child, do you think this is okay? No, I don't. So I say, okay, well, let's see about the rest of the class. Do you side with goody two shoes who the teacher thinks is lovely, or would you actually rather be with us? And I can guarantee that about 50% of the class will shoot up to my side as the bully. If I then approach the other side and go and say, some of, you know, fair enough, but you know, some of your friends are in this group. Do you want to lose them forever? I go, then you'd better join them, hadn't you? Otherwise, you'll be next. And by the end, if I'm really clever, I can even have the child who's bullied on my side. It's a matter of social manipulation, and it's rarely aimed at you. It's aimed at something you represent. So understanding those things, understanding what bullying is about, aggressive behaviours, is important. I mean, there are hundreds of really superb psychology studies that talk about aggression, how it happens in groups, what happens. We don't teach this. We should have philosophy and psychology as basic subjects in school, because without understanding where aggression comes from, what it's about, it's really hard to counter it when it does happen. And as you say, if you haven't realized what it's about and then it happens and you snap, then you take the blame, because you've been quiet up to that point. And yeah. You know, and teasing as well is another one. And when we feel embarrassed, we laugh. So we get teased, we laugh because we're embarrassed and we feel stupid. And then when we finally say, actually, this isn't okay, nobody believes us. Mm-hmm. So talking about bullying is, you know, it's not a depressing thing. It's a life skill. It's learning to cope with relationships, what is okay, what is not okay. And we often override our kids' initial reactions. You know, like the old joke of, you know, come and kiss Granny, and it's really not something you want to do. Parents insist.
Yeah.
And then wonder later why their child hasn't said no to abusive touching. So I think we just need to be more aware. And you know, I am hugely sympathetic to parents whose kids get picked on, and as a parent, you're a secondary victim. So it is miserable, but there are ways to cope and go forward.
Emily, I have found this absolutely fascinating, and we're going to put a link to your book, Autism, Bullying Me, on Facebook page. Thank you so much. We've had such strong engagement, and when you go back to the Facebook feed, you'll see how affirming some of the comments are, and actually it's concerning how many people have experienced this. But we've come to the end of our time, but I can't thank you enough. I have so enjoyed learning from you today, and I hope we'll have you back some other time, because this is just such an important topic. Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who's participated on Facebook.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I will now go to Facebook and have a look at those questions.
Great. Thanks, Emily.
You're welcome.